incremental improvements. So, yes?
By fast flux, do you mean something like image boards, or do you mean highly dynamic IP ranges?
Dynamic IP ranges. Thank you. So generally speaking, we are spending a lot on resources on these incremental improvements. We are at the far end of the 80-20 rule, right? We had the easy stuff coming on with 20% of our resources, and now we're spending 80% of our resources to solve the last 20%. Part of our problem is that our problems are actually what I'd like to call gray or fuzzy, but our technology solutions tend to be binary. So we understand what has to happen technically, but we don't really understand all of the behavioral pieces that have to go with it. So when you find yourself in a hole, the expression says stop digging. Now for those of you who actually know me beyond this topic, this is a little pun because I am like a total DNS junkie, so when I said stop digging was a little pun. What are the other areas of science that can help us? Can we get an assist maybe from the soft sciences? And if so, which ones are we going to get this assist from? A little history here on some of this. I took an educational psychology class about 5 years ago because I was thinking about leaving the field and just becoming a teacher and corrupting the youth. Not in terms of teaching them how to hack, but in terms of teaching them how to question the oppressors or the authority, whatever way you want to consider it. And I thought it would be good to get out there and, like I said, just take on and corrupt the next generation. But I came to the realization that I like wine way too much and good chocolate, and I would not be able to have the wines and chocolate that I like with the teacher's salary, so I said I better stick with what I'm doing. I did learn some things out of my educational psychology class, though. I learned that there are different ways that people learn. There are different ways that their culture affects their learning and how you have to teach them accordingly. So the thought kind of stuck with me, and I thought, we always look at how we can do things in terms of that we have criminals that are psychologically profiled. Can we profile computer network attacks then? Because isn't that kind of a criminal behavior? And if so, to what degree and what aspects can we do this on? So when we look into profiling computer network attack behavior, we have to consider that, one, this is not about the individual. This is about groups of people, cultures. Trying to do it with the individual, with the knowledge base that is there right now, would be an impossible task. Groups would be good, but we lack foundational information, so where do we get it? Well, it turns out that some of the countries out there have some foundational information for us. And historically, there has been working groups within the government that look at linguistics. But I think that we should go beyond linguistics. There's more to it than just the language. We see differences in cultures all throughout all other aspects. Think about art and dance. You think like folk stories and folk dances and things like that. It's always the same story, girl sees boy sees girl wants to flirt with boy wants to impress girl, and they tell these stories in dance and their art, but they do it all in slightly different ways. Another way that we see it, I'm a big soccer fan. I see a DC United shirt here in the audience. I really, really love watching the World Cup every year. And one of the things, not every year, every 4 years, but one of the things that jumps out at you is the difference in the style of play amongst the different nations. Watch Brazil, watch Spain, watch Germany, watch England, all very good teams, and yet they all have very different styles. So this is kind of starting to lend to this idea that countries do things differently. Customs also, but we suspect this is not as vital, but it's just kind of out of scope getting into the specific customs of these nations. So it turns out that my research took me to a couple of different professors who have done some good work, but I guess the father of all of this is a Dr. Hofstede out of the Netherlands. And his quote is, "Culture is defined as the collective mental programming of the human mind, which distinguishes one group of people from another." Ding, 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 ding. This is like, wow, this was like, yay, found something good here. The collective mental programming of the human mind. Is this not what we're trying to find? Is how, if we understand how the human mind is programmed, then we can anticipate the next move that the human mind will make. This does not, he put together this fantastic matrix. I'm using it. A lot of people, it's become the baseline for cultural dimensions in lots of different study areas. And his matrix, some things you have to be aware of, does not reflect differences between individuals. It reflects differences between different countries. The statements about cultures are general, and more importantly, they're relative. And by relative, he means they're relative to each other in the matrix. And of course, the appeal of culture lies in the fact that people's thought processes subconsciously reflect their cultural background. So while it's not great for individual hacker attribution, it has cyber warfare implications, because you're able to say, I can look and watch the behavior, and people don't really change the way they formulate a problem and put together their alternatives to solve the problem. This is something that we've learned growing up, and this is how we process information. So there are good defensive, obviously, plays for this, but then the thought was, if we're able to put all this together and come up with a good defensive taxonomy, and I understood what another culture looked like, then there's an offensive play on this, because then I would go ahead, if I wanted to do an attack, I would cloak myself as somebody else and try to exhibit their behaviors when I wanted to go ahead and attack another site. So we're thinking the markers should reveal themselves even in reused attacks, because it may not be just simply looking at the code, but looking at the choices in which people pull things together and the order in which they do things. Now, Dr. Hofstede identified 4 different cultural dimensions. Power distance, this has to deal with how far an individual, the society has their individuals from the decision-making loop. So a good way to think of it is hierarchical societies versus egalitarian societies. Then you had individual versus collective. Do we reward individualistic efforts, or do we put the group above the individual? Masculine, feminine. Is the culture more of a paternal or a masculine view of the world, or do they have a feminine one? I'm going to get into this a little more later in a couple slides too, so if it seems like I'm rushing through it, don't worry about it. Uncertainty avoidance. Are you comfortable living in that gray area, or do you have to have a strong sense of what's the next step? Then we've had others that added to the model. Bond added a good pair. He added long-term orientation versus immediate results. And then Minkoff added 2, he's in the process actually of adding his, indulgence versus restraint, and monumentalism versus self-effacement. Now the last one, monumentalism versus self-effacement, really caught my eye, because historically there have been groups where when somebody does an attack, they will leave a monument in the code, say, ha 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 ha, I did this and I'm so-and-so, I'm so great, or, for the glory of Allah, or whatever you want to say, in there. So this is a good marker to focus in on. So let's talk about what this means in terms of the attack, cultural dimensions, and in terms of attacks. So power distance. I believe this is going to be a secondary characteristic, because the fact that somebody's attacking your network, they've already been empowered to pretty much do what they wish to do. What will probably happen is, I'm suspecting is going to happen, is people who are in a society where they are further removed from power may be a little slower in their decision making, and we may be able to pick up on that, but not sure yet. Individualism versus collectivism. This I would expect to see, this should be a major marker here, because individuals, you're going to see, when individualism is rewarded, you're going to see more risks, bigger steps taken, risk-reward, right? So when you say, as an individual, I think that, I'm empowered to go out and create my own attack or make my name for myself, I have incentive to go ahead and do this. I don't have to think about other people. Now, if I have to do this collectively, and I'm working in a group, and I'm a collectivist, I was raised in a collectivist society, I may say, I have to consult with my teammates first before I do anything. Masculine versus feminine. Again, this is not manly men and girly men and manly women and girly girls. This has to do with aggression. This is going to be an interesting marker, because by the very nature of network attacks, you're already in the aggression space. One of the things that Hofstede found on this particular marker was, it wasn't that women in masculine countries were so subjugated, as much as they found that women, like in the United States, where it is a highly masculine country, tend to be a little more aggressive. And of course, men in countries like like Norway, Sweden, Scandinavian countries that came out high feminine, it's not that they're not masculine at all, as much as they are just not as aggressive in various situations. Uncertainty avoidance. We suspect this is going to whoops, sorry, my moose got in the way here. Bodyguard got a little ambitious there. Okay, this may manifest itself in behaviors more so than software. Uncertainty avoidance, again, is one of those areas where if you're in this space already trying to do attacks, you're already pretty happy in the uncertainty area, because when you're dealing with uncertainty, that's the areas where you actually come in and start making your move on a site. Anywhere where there's ambiguity. Indulgence versus restraint. This is a good one because this deals with instant gratification versus waiting until later on your restraint. So would we expect to see something like maybe denial of service attacks filling in on countries that come in high on the instant gratification or the indulgence end? This will be interesting to see where this one shakes out. And of course, monumentalism versus self-effacement. Do people leave monuments in code? Are they bragging? Are they taunting? Are they leaving behind special objects? Anything that can be kind of remotely tied to them because they're proud of what they did. Lack of monuments can also serve as a clue. If there are no monuments in the code, does this imply that maybe I'm dealing with a society or a group that does not want to be seen and does not want to be remembered and really is trying to be stealth? More. Issues, concerns, caveats with going down this path. Dominic Guest down in Florida, he's another one who's been very encouraging on this and was really excited when I mentioned this area of study for him. Went on to say, the study of culture and decision-making is a relatively new and unexplored field. Note, he said this in 2004, and it's still, in terms of the research world, this is a really young area, so getting the literature that's needed is not going to be easy, and there's always the fear that things could change. Have to guard against stereotypes. There is always a little bit of an element of truth in some stereotypes, but the trick is to make sure that we keep the stereotypes in their proper perspective and that the data supports actually what we're seeing, and that we don't try to force the data down the path of supporting the stereotype. Network attack activity is inherently an aggressive behavior, and funny thing is I would expect, and so far from what I've seen, there's a disproportional representation by certain countries like the United States, Australia, where you have, again, that high masculinity and high individualist markings already. So the fear, of course, is that this could end up skewing our results. The other thing that I have to keep in mind, even something that seems painfully obvious has to be supported by data. Something borrowed. Again, the role of reusable code, reusable attacks. People put together attacks and they put them up on websites, and then anyone in the world has access to them. So how does this actually play out when we're trying to do this? My suspicion when we set the taxonomy is it's going to be something like setting it up so that when the attack is first launched, gathering the information from that, and subsequent attack information only if it varies on the variations. The variants will be what is interesting, or what will need to be studied and cataloged. Okay, not every area may be relevant. We are going to need, in Hofstede's matrix there, we may find that some areas are just going to become what I like to call secondary features of this, secondary characteristics, and that really it's the primary areas, and sorting the primary from the secondary may become a bit of a challenge too. Dr. Guest down in Florida, again, I mentioned he was extremely helpful. He should have been in the acknowledgments in the beginning, but because I was so scared, I forgot to mention his name. Dr. Guest has taken Hofstede's work and started combining elements together. And what he's done is he really has examined individualism versus collectivism. And he discovered that individualist societies versus collectivist values can influence the perception of the problem, the generation of strategies and alternatives, and the selection of one alternative. This was again, another key data point, because now you've got someone who's actually saying, yes, based on the cultural background, I'm seeing certain behaviors on how they're framing their problem and solving their problem. So how does this relate to network attacks? Well, Dr. Gus gathered inputs for his problems from Dr. Hofstede, and what he found was a high degree of individualism correlates to faster decision-making, while collectivism correlates to proceeding slowly and carefully. How does this go to attacks? Well, we're going to see more aggressive attack behavior from individualist societies, whereas collaborative ones, you may see more incremental. So, two things that he's done, two areas where he's really focused his studies are on complex problem solving and dynamic decision making, both areas that are very important in terms of computer network attacks. Trying to attack someone's network and getting to the goodies is not a simple task. Yeah, I know people like to brag and say, yeah, I own this site in 5 seconds, whatever you want to say, I can do this. But the reality is it is a lot of work, and it is a bit more complex, and we have a cat and mouse game going on. So seeing how people adjust to these different changes and how they actually solve their problem is an interesting exercise, I would think. Dynamic decision making is even more fascinating, because we have people come into a site and they're going to, what happens when you start throwing blocks up? Which way did they go? Did they go right or did they go left? And what influences their choices on that? So, individualism versus collectivism. In individualist cultures, people are confident. One thing that was discovered is people are very confident in their decision-making ability. They don't second-guess themselves. They say, hey, I made the decision, now I'm going to make it work. Collectivist cultures, there's a lack of trust in decision-making and the ability in decision-making ability, and this results in hypervigilance, avoidance, and buck passing. Now, avoidance and buck passing, probably not so much on network attacks, but hypervigilance is very relevant, because now you're going to see somebody's going to do something and they're going to make sure that it worked. Whereas in a case where someone's confident with what they've done, they said, yeah, I know it's going to work, I'm on to the next thing. We integrated several of Hofstede's areas together, such as long-term orientation and power distance. And what he had expected was that people from a society where there was a collective high power distance with high long-term orientation should do really well in complex problem solving. What he actually found was individualism correlated with risky and expansive strategies. So when you see a bold new attack, the likelihood that it originated from a culture where individualism is valued is higher. Collectivism correlated with incremental and defensive strategies. So what we're talking here is the individualists will do something different. The collectivists will take something that was different and make it better. Power distance values intensifies or weakens the strategies. So it fed into this whole individualist versus collectivist. And so if you have someone who's from who has a power distance where they're from an egalitarian society and they're in a high individualist culture, you would expect them to kind of act like cowboys on the internet when they're attacking. And you may find someone who's maybe high on collectivism and far away from power in a hierarchical society. You would expect them to be a little more restrained when they're attacking. So how does this all translate? Of course, no talk about computer network security is complete without a few art of war quotes. Know thy enemy and know yourself. In 100 battles you will never peril. Well, the first part of knowing the enemy, this is another way of knowing our enemy, just another dimension to it. Those skilled in the art of war subdue the enemy's army without battle. They conquer by strategy. And what we're trying to do is get a step ahead here and understand our enemy, not just what attacks they're going to launch, but where's their head. I'll give you a little side story here. My daughter, I love her to death. She obviously, she's my daughter. She has my husband's personality, so I'm very explosive, and she's an athlete. And every once in a while on the soccer pitch, and she's a goalie too, and she just kind of goes off on her teammates when they don't do what they're supposed to do. And it's all okay after the game, but at one point somebody asked her, said, "Sample, what goes through your head?" And of course, we ask her that all the time now whenever we're having a conversation. And really, this is what we're trying to do. What goes through your head, attacker? Suggests that by understanding cross-cultural thought processes, we may have an additional data point in attack attribution to add to other data points currently in use. Again, we're not trying to replace the hard markers, we're trying to add to what's there in the hard markers. New attacks can be viewed through traditional methods and then mapped to these cultural markers in the hope that we can gain further insight to our adversaries. We may also be able to determine the adversary's specific weaknesses for exploitation. If we understand how they're thinking, maybe we can find their Achilles heel. And of course, the ability to classify attacks by adversary methods offers hope for predictive analysis. And actually, if this is successful, it offers a lot of hope in a lot of other areas. There are so many things that can go on with this, assuming we get through these first steps. So what's the research project? And this is why I'm talking today, because I definitely could benefit from other people's opinions on how we can make this better. I think we want to first create a taxonomy of attacks and map to the work by Hofstede, Minkoff, and Guess. And this taxonomy of attacks has to be of attacks that are we have known 100% certainty attribution on these attacks. And yes, I know that that will exclude some of the attacks that are more sexy and more recent, like Doku. But it's still we have to have a basis for building all of this first. So I'm hoping that once we create the taxonomy and we start populating it, that we'll be able to quantify results. And when you're starting to quantify your results, then you can look for statistical clusters to appear, or patterns. Then we create the foundation for further work in this area, because once you understand what someone's behavior is and you can tell where the attack is coming from, you will have the ability to cloak yourself if you wish to counterattack that site and look like maybe another one of their adversaries. I suspect there's going to be a role for this ultimately in assisting in what I call true APT detection and attribution. I say true APT because I think this is one of the most overused terms right now out there, and sometimes I'm not sure if it's true, if it's really advanced persistent threat or if it's just persistent threat and somebody just hasn't figured out that they need to maybe change their tactics a bit. So we're also, I think there's a way to create better attacks, maybe customize our attacks for our adversaries based on this knowledge. So I wanted to run through a couple of examples. I loved this one. First of all, I love the Brits anyways. Like, shoot, they gave us Monty Python. So here's a case where the Brits came in and they took care of they went to the Al-Qaeda website and they wanted to replace how to make bombs. And I believe the actual story was that they were working in conjunction with the Americans who simply wanted to take down the site. And of course, the Brits got their way. And so let's take a look at this through the prism of cultural dimensions. Okay, so unfortunately, there's not a British cheekiness value, but we do have the fact that the Brits scored very high on individualism. Actually, they score higher than us on individualism. And so did the Aussies, who actually scored higher than the Brits, but that's a whole nother. Anyways, so they're high on that. They're low on the power distance. So, of course, it's basically the idea is if you have a clever idea, you can take the ball and run with it. And that's what happened. They're still researching the indulgence versus self-restraint aspect on the UK. Minkoff did not, on the early stuff that I saw in Minkoff, he did not have UK in his matrix yet. Long-term, low on long-term orientation. Not surprising, a lot of the Western cultures, specifically the ones that were found, that were settled by the Brits, the former British Empire, don't do quite as well on long-term orientation, with the exception of Hong Kong. This may be a hint at why the website was defaced instead of simply tapped. If you knew people were going to be coming to that website and wanting to make bombs, why not just gather their information and exfiltrate it out so that you could stick local authorities on them? If you already got onto the website anyways, you already owned it. Second one, Stuxnet, probably the most studied worm on the planet right now. It targeted specific industrial control systems running Windows, and it had at least 4 zero-day attacks in it. So what was good about this is we're finding high in creativity, additionally high in funding, so that kind of eliminated a lot of countries from the equation. And it's targeted specific programmable logic controls used to control the uranium enrichment by altering the centrifuge speed. So this is a very creative attack. So I got ahead of myself, sorry. So no one's coming out and saying, yes, 100% certainty, but the fingers have pointed for a while at US and Israel. So again, US is very high on individualism. Israel is a medium on individualism. Medium score by Israel is important, though, because what it indicates is that they are more balanced in terms of they're not only going to do something different, but they'll also filter in the doing it better. And of course, the uniqueness or the idea to do it, doing something different, is a very US marker. So if you pull these two together, what ends up happening is you say, as Avionics Week quoted, Israel can pull talent together from across its industry and military to create a team that can focus on a problem until it is solved. Basically, they can just go at it, and they have, not only do they have the creative mindset to do it, they have the resources and the desire to make it better. Israel also has a very low power distance score, actually significantly lower than the US. US is like in the low to medium range. Israel is like, my God, everybody's prime minister, if you looked at that, if you looked at their score. It implies that Israel is going to execute faster or before the US. Monumentalism versus self-effacing. Now, the US ranked in the middle here, and there are no scores available on Minkoff's work for Israel on this. However, scores tend to cluster around regions, and one of the things that was interesting in Minkoff's results was on his top 10 of regions that are the highest in monumentalism, 5 of the countries were Middle East countries. There's an ongoing debate right now about is it Mertis or MyRTUs? I don't know if anyone is familiar with this. Someone in the New York Times several months ago put out an article about Stuxnet and claimed that there was a biblical reference, and I apologize if it's not Mertis, because I'm just a cafeteria Catholic. I don't know anything about Judaism. So, but apparently there's this Mertis is a reference to a book of Esther about some battle between the Persians and the Jews, and okay, so that's about all as far as I can go on that. And then somebody else came up and said, I don't think so. This was a really sophisticated attack, and I would think that if someone wants to, it would be really out of character to try to leave a monument in a code piece like this that would lead someone back to you, because this is well funded. The idea is to be extraordinarily successful here. So maybe what they were really talking about was MyRTUs, remote terminal units. To be determined. Of course, our third one, and I should say that when we look at each of these examples, what I did was I took one that had 100% certainty, something that had fairly decent certainty on who launched it, and now we have one that is no one really knows. So let's talk about DoQ for a minute. These were just some of the headlines that went along with DoQ, and there's a battle going on right now. Some are saying, yes, DoQ, it's got Stuxnet code reused, and it was the same people that wrote Stuxnet, and by golly, that's just another phase of it. And then some others have come out. Kaspersky Labs came out and said, not so fast there, and we're not really sure. And there are some people on both sides of this issue who are very knowledgeable on attack attribution and attack behaviors. And there's no consensus on what happened here. In fact, when I first heard about this attack, my friend from Symantec sent me the report like as soon as it came out, and he said, looks like it's the same people that did Stuxnet. And I looked at the report and I said, not so fast. These ones really were working hard. It's totally different goals and objectives here. They're working really hard to remain stealth. Is it possible that maybe some of the Stuxnet code became available to somebody else? Did somebody slip it out? Is there maybe a developer that was working on Stuxnet that has since left and gone on somewhere else, and they, again, slipped out the code with them? Don't know. And it's going to be interesting to watch this one play out. So, first item that we noticed was there's still no attribution. A couple of items of interest. The code reuse from Stuxnet, is this going down are we going to do something better? Does it point to a collectivist behavior? Need to find out. The DoQ extensions, uniformity of your extensions, more of a collectivist thing. The nature of the attack, quiet exfiltration of information as opposed to taking down something or getting something to misbehave. And we still don't know when everything's going to actually start, if it'll come back later and if there's going to be more with this. So it's exfiltration without calling attention to the self. It hints at self-effacing behavior, or at least a desire to not be seen. So 3 different attacks, 3 different attribution levels. You can see why you may or may not see why there's a desire to start putting in these other markers and these dimensions into our decision making. What are the next steps? Well, I need to collect the attributed attacks information, and I need to create the taxonomy. And creating the taxonomy is where I could really use an assist from all of you. When I'm creating the taxonomy, I have to define the grouping by mapping general attack behaviors to cultural dimensions. So where there are monuments left in the code, if this was a novel attack, or was it an improvement to an existing attack, or was it a creative reuse of an existing attack? It may turn out that it falls somewhere in between on our markers here. What's going to be the scale or the scoring that we're going to use when we actually do this? And then, of course, being able to quantify the results is key so that I can look for clusters. Why should we care? Well, attack attribution is much more than simple strike-back capabilities. It was funny, I was at a conference, and it was a wonderful conference, and this guy gets up and he's talking about, he's just really quite proud of himself. He runs a porn site, and nobody attacks his site because as soon as his site gets an attack, they strike right back. And I'm like, oh, God. Okay, so dude, you have no idea who you're hitting. You don't know if the person was, if the IP address is actually a legitimate attacker or some poor schmuck whose PC has been taken over. But I also I said, well, maybe in your line of work you can get away with that. Christ, if the Army tried that, Jesus, we'd have an international incident on our hands. So. So we want to be able to give counterattackers greater certainty in what we're doing. We have the potential to better anticipate attackers' motivations and next moves by understanding what they're doing. And of course, it provides some additional context for our current data. Now, something else that kind of just stumbled on this past week. When I initially was thinking, oh God, people are going to think I'm crazy for going down this path, I found out that I'm not alone. A couple of university students in China put together an analysis of impact Chinese and Western cultural values have on technological innovation. This was out of Wuhan University of Technology. And guess what? They're using Hofstede's matrix to try to map to this. So what do I need? More data, of course. Attributed attack reports are always helpful. More results on cross-cultural cognitive differences. Your thoughts on how we can make this better. Any help or support you can give me. I'm working off my Gmail account on this one. You can also reach me at csample@cert.org, but because this was not a CERT-sanctioned talk, I didn't put my CERT address up here. And I'll open up for any questions or comments. And I want to thank all of you for your time and for not moosing me. Wow, no. Yes, in the back.
How do you deal with bureaucratic organizations within highly individualistic countries or vice versa? How does that skew the results?
So the question was, how do we deal with bureaucratic organizations or governments within individualistic countries, and how will that skew the results? What I would expect to find in that case would be, you may find a creative attack that took a long time to launch, okay, because the bureaucracy keeps you from being able to, from empowering the attacker or the user. Thanks. Yes?
People spend a lot of time online, have lots of online friends. What do you think is the relative importance of your origin versus your current social?
I'm sorry, I missed the third.
What do you think is the relative importance of your origins and your cultural, where you're from, and your current social trends?
Okay, so question was, what do I think is the relevance of my,
The relative importance.
the relative importance of origins versus,
What's origins? Like, I'm Cuban, right?
yeah?
My friends who I hang out with now online.
Okay, so in terms of like your friends, it's kind of interesting because one of the things that I kind of discovered before I even went down this path is that when you're talking with people, your friends from other countries, it's funny. One, first, how you'll have different expressions that mean the same thing, and the other one is you will. Oh God, I just had a senior moment. Okay, so first you'll have these different expressions that, we'll go down that path. You'll have different expressions that mean the same thing. For example, you said you're Cuban, right? Well, I have a couple of friends in Ireland and a couple of friends in England that I like to talk to online. Now, one day I was talking to one of my friends in Ireland, and he said something like, I can't even remember what I had done, but his remark was, he said, oh yeah, I remember that. Big smile is what you had on that day. Now, luckily, my husband wasn't in the room because I think he would have said, well, I hope you had more on than a smile. But this person was actually referring to the fact that I was having a good time, and it was apparent to all that I had apparently trapped somebody in something. Now, of course, if I had that conversation with a British friend, he'd say, oh, you had a jolly good time on that, didn't you? Or took the piss out of someone. And of course, if it were an American, they'd turn around and say, wow, we had a great time, didn't we? And he just right straight on it with you. The second part was, I found that when you're working with people from different countries, a lot of times you're getting to the same endpoint, but you're getting there in different paths. You find this a lot of times when you're collaborating on projects. You'll say, wow, I think we should do it this way, and someone else will say, no, we should do it this way. And oftentimes you'll have two groups that'll form and they'll do things differently, and they still get to the same end result. So that's really, I think, more relevant to your question, that you're finding different ways to get there, but you're all getting to the same end point. And by the way, I love your sweatshirt. That's my favorite, one of my favorite teams. So, yes. Uh-huh. It's actually focused more on the strategies than the code, although the code will be examined when it's available. The goal right now is simply to create the taxonomy. Oh, by the way, the question was, how do we focus, how are we dealing with the fact that we will have it sounds like cross-cultural collaboration, right? Is that okay? So the goal right now is just to create the taxonomy to see where everything falls out, and to see if there is actually something to this. I believe there is probably going to be something to it, but I also believe it's going to have to get tuned. Yes? Okay. Ah.
For example, sometimes the best outcomes is draw, and sometimes you can get adversaries to self-attribute by simply not acting decisively, forcing them to make a decision on a certain. Once you do that, if you don't respond the way they predict you will, and you basically tap into this whole collectivist versus individualist differentiation, and you can get them to basically attribute themselves.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, I definitely will check that paper out. And really, like when you think about this is not really revolutionary in that countries have been doing this in the general battlefield. What's different is the idea of taking this to the cyber battlefield. So thank you. The Long War, right? Okay, by Rand.
They discovered all kinds of things that they later applied in other parts of the world. Ireland was a laboratory for urban warfare, fighting urban warfare in Ireland for 100 years. They later used this in South Africa, they used this in other places. Sometimes not acting
And-
Finding out their inherent time delay comfort zone, getting them to act in a way that tips their responses. Also, too, certain attacking groups don't act characteristic to their culture. For example, the publicly available information on the Lockheed attack.
The which attack?
The Lockheed attack.
Okay.